I'm Zach Smith with Rainbow Resource Center, and I'm here with Ray Notgrass from Notgrass History. We're just going to talk about how to make history interesting, which is quite a topic, I think. So, a lot of people have some interest in that. So.
That's true.
Yeah. So why do some people think history is boring?
I think it's because the way it was taught, maybe a boring or unprepared teacher or a boring textbook, and that's their perspective. That's how they learned what history was about, and it's names and dates and wars, and names and dates and wars, and a monotone lecture, and get the information covered, get it out, put it down on the test, then forget it. Just going through the motions. And I think possibly homeschooling parents might commit the same problem when they say, "Okay, kids, we got to do history this year. Let's get through it. I'll try to make it as easy as possible." I think the attitude of the parent can make a huge difference because the kids are going to pick that up. Yeah, mom doesn't like history either, so why should I get too excited about it? But I don't know how many parents have told us, I hated history when I was in school, but now I love it. And it's that kind of attitude that will encourage their students to say, "Hey, this is neat. I can learn something. I can grow from this."
Yeah. Now, have you always been interested in history, or did you pick up an interest in history somewhere along the way?
Well, I kind of grew up with it. My grandfather was a big Civil War collector. He had in his foyer just a whole display of Civil War memorabilia. He told us that he visited every battlefield in North America.
Wow.
And this was back in the day when there was still stuff on the ground that he could pick up, and take with him. So I grew up with that. His son, my dad, fought in World War II. He was in the Army in Europe in World War II. And so we heard the stories, we understood that he was involved in that, and that was a big part of who he was, of his life experience, and so we gained from that. I think probably a key moment for me in really delving into history was when I was a junior in high school. The best history teacher, American history teacher in the school, and the best English teacher in school coordinated their classes for that year. And as we studied American history, we studied American literature that was of the same period. So when we studied the colonial period, we read the Scarlet Letter and on through. And that was just such a good experience. And the history teacher had us buy just a little paperback book of original sources that he would assign to us as part of our homework. And so I got to read these documents, not just a paragraph, or a snippet, but the whole document, to hear what those people in history were saying. And that was a positive experience for me. And I date my interest in history and my decision to major in history in college from that year's experience.
Right. Well, I'd be really interested to hear your advice to parents or ideas that you have to help parents make history more interesting for their children.
Okay. Well, I would say, first of all, don't depend on textbooks. That might sound weird from someone who writes history books, but go to those original sources. Don't just read about people who say, don't just read that Patrick Henry gave an important speech that ended "Give me liberty" or "Give me death." Read the speech.
Yeah.
Understand what was at stake there, and the whole thing. It's a moving, inspiring speech. And school textbooks are often written for the convenience of the teacher to get through the material in a certain pound of time, and as a result, they have to leave out so many of the great stories. And I would encourage parents to get to know the stories, the individuals, the people, the little events that don't make it in the textbooks, but that are fascinating to read about. I think another thing to do is to emphasize individuals. Don't just say Americans believed or Americans fought, but someone who stood up and made a difference. Frederick Douglass, who was a former slave who became probably the greatest spokesman for abolition before the Civil War. It wasn't just the abolition movement. It was Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, other individuals who risked a lot to stand for what they did. Appreciate the individuals who really made a difference in their lives. Individuals tell us stories of success, of inventiveness, people who serve other people selflessly. And those are challenges to us, not just to settle down and take things easily. So I would encourage to emphasize individuals. I think another thing is to learn the literature, learn the stories. The history textbooks will tell you that in 1863, Congress passed the Homestead Act that gave 160 acres to settlers who would live on the land for 5 years, pay a small fee, and so many tens of thousands of people did that. That's interesting. The Little House books tell you what it was like to live on the prairie, to live in that kind of setting, in that arrangement. And so that literature tells you what that law meant for America and for those individuals who took that plunge. And so to learn the literature is really important in understanding what history meant for people. I think it's good to make a connection with a child's interests. A child might not be too thrilled about studying wars and military because that's a big part of history many times. I understand that. How about the history of art? How about the history of science? There are different ways of approaching history that can really be relevant for a student. And so, open up those possibilities. But I think the best way to make history interesting for students is to go on field trips to historic sites. There is nothing that makes history come alive the way going to the places where history was made can do, because you have this picture in your mind's eye of what it was like when Lincoln spoke in Springfield, or when something happened in Washington, or on a battlefield. To have in my head a picture of what that setting was really brings it off the page, and is something that can be alive for me. So I would encourage any chance you get, take your children to historic sites and realize what happened there.
Great. Well, before we wrap it up, any just final words of encouragement for just really giving history that kick that will pique a child's interest?
Well, you can probably tell that it's a passion of mine.
Right.
I would like to encourage parents to realize that to be able to study history is a gift. It's a blessing. In the book, The Giver, that we use as one of the pieces of literature in our curriculum, those people don't know history. And as a result, the leaders of their community can do all kinds of things to them that are not good because they don't have historical perspective about it. But to be able to know history and to study history, it's a gift. History is like hearing from our ancestors, from the people of previous generations, hearing them tell their story. And that's so enriching to be able to have that. And so we need to take advantage of it. We need to learn from them and be reminded of their experience and what they have to teach us. And I just want to encourage parents to realize the human connection with history, that it's not facts, it's not, like I mentioned, names and dates and wars, but these are people. Many times these are your ancestors that are involved in this. It's great to find out more about your own family history, the history of your community. Why is it named what it is? Why is the county named what it is? Why is that street named what it is? People lie behind that. And that makes it real. That gives you a connection. So always look for the personal connection and come to appreciate what that means for us today.
Right, absolutely. No, that's just fantastic information to have. As we're considering how to use history in our own schooling, and in fact, I'm using From Adam to Us right now with my two oldest daughters.
Hey, well, thank you.
Yeah, no, and they're thoroughly enjoying it. And I mean, even just to touch on a few points you made, there's a supplemental book, Our Creative World, that goes along with that, and it just pulls out these really interesting components from history that my children would, and even myself, I would never have thought to kind of focus in on that, that piece of history from a certain time period.
Yeah.
And so they've been just really intrigued by, seeing the cuneiform on certain clay items, and just seeing some of the detail that is there through history. Of course, makes the job of teaching a lot easier. So
that's true.
It's
this is our world, and
Yeah.
we need to be engaged in it to be salt and light to further the kingdom.
Yeah.
That's what we want to encourage.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank you.
all that you do here.
Yes, thank you.